What are the most common complications and how likely are you to get it? Hi guys, today we are going to talk about nose job recovery, rhinoplasty complications. Today we are going to talk about my complications from my nose job and what are the statistics of you getting botched, basically. So yeah, this video is not to scare you. 85 to 90% of people will be happy with their nose job enough to not get a second rhinoplasty. But I feel like it's important to know the risks if you really want this surgery. So yeah, if you haven't seen my other videos, my name is Charlie. I'm 5.5 months into recovering from my nose job, halfway through rhinoplasty recovery. Before I get into the details though of my complications, I want to talk a little bit. I did so much research, 5 hours. All the information I'm going to tell you guys is backed up by research, and I will be linking all those articles below. So yeah, none of this information I found off Google, none of this information I found off YouTube. I found it all actually from scholar literature written by doctors for doctors. So yeah, after like 5 hours of like studying and reading these like articles, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding, or at least enough to be able to like give like an educated kind of explanation in simple terms of just like the world of complications in rhinoplasty. I've got statistics, I've got it all. So I've realized there's a lot of vlogs on YouTube covering individual creators' experiences, which helped me so much when it came to like the mental aspect. I just felt like I was so prepared because of YouTube vlogs. But when you want something from a more educational standpoint when looking up on YouTube, it's always a doctor sitting behind their work desk giving the most vague description of possible complications, and 90% of them only mention like swelling and bleeding, and that's not really a complication, that's just kind of a side effect. I hope I can provide something educational today, and hopefully it's not too boring. Did you know that 10% of people who get a nose job actually end up getting a second rhinoplasty, which means 10 people in every 100 end up having to get a second surgery because they're not happy with the result or there was a complication. 1 in every 10 people. So after my research, I managed to like break down into 3 categories the most common reasons for revision, and that is deformities formed as a result of surgery, patients complaining that there is now a breathing disturbance, whether it be they had a breathing disturbance before the operation and it's still present, or now they are having breathing issues that they didn't have prior before the rhinoplasty. And the third, just basically unsatisfied. So the most common reasons for revision rhinoplasty was actually breathing difficulty, which was actually reported in 70% of the patients who got a revision who had rhinoplasty reduction surgery performed on them, which is basically just making the nose smaller. If you go onto YouTube, you will find a few people who have very common videos, very popular videos, who have had too much reduction taken off, and as a result their nose looks really cute but they can't breathe. And trust me, as someone who had a broken nose, it turned out to be like she thought. I have so many breathing issues right now. You don't realize how good breathing is out of your nose until you can't. 10% of people post-op complain of not being able to breathe comfortably or the way that they would want to. It's also important to keep in mind that patients at certain stages of their healing can feel like they're having breathing difficulties even when they're not, just as a result of swelling or even scar tissue. You can develop some numbness inside the nose, which can make it feel like there's no air going in when there really is. There's a few different things, but 10% of patients do complain of breathing difficulty. Yeah. I then went on to read this other article written by this ENT surgeon. I think he's from England, I can't remember. He's written a bunch of stuff. He's like really respected, and he wrote an article that touched on how bone cutting can narrow the airways. So based off this, we can assume that the more bone we ask to take off, the more likely it might be that our airways might be narrowed, which helps support that thing that a lot of people say online, which is if you go to a surgeon and they tell you you can have any nose you want, it might come out looking amazing, but you might also come out not being able to breathe. Go with surgeons who aren't afraid to tell you no, but who do listen to your concerns. So yeah, definitely don't go with a surgeon that looks like they're just trying to tell you everything you want to hear. So let's say that your nose ends up being perfect straight out of surgery. Well, Statistically, and quoted, it is rare for the patient post-op to have the exact same nose they did after surgery. So even if the surgeon gives you the perfect nose you want, it's still probably gonna change just due to the healing phase and what happens during your healing process and how your nose chooses to heal. I mean, everybody scars differently. You can have internal scarring, what's it called? Scar tissue. So from those studies, we can see that obviously the healing process has a massive impact on the outcome of your nose, which is why I made this video. You can watch it after this one. The purpose of me mentioning the fact that the healing process can alter the outcome of your nose is that I found something really interesting in the research. So if a surgeon makes a mistake, it can often not be discerned from the strange way the nose heals after rhinoplasty. If a doctor doesn't take a photo of your nose straight away after surgery, you really have no proof to say, oh hey, I feel like I came out of surgery looking like this, and they can say, oh no, that's just something that happened during healing. I just think personally, after finding that out, a good way to be able to tell whether or not a surgeon is truly trustworthy in their practice is asking in your consultation, would you be willing to take a photo straight out of surgery? Even with the knowledge that the nose might change due to the healing process, I think it's important to know whether or not you started the healing process with that issue, or if it is something that developed, and sometimes you only know that maybe if you have a photo. So yeah, I would say ask about that. If they absolutely don't want to take a photo, I would be sus on them and I would go to the next doctor. It's just good to have that research backed up, that really sometimes you can't discern the difference of whether or not it was something the doctor did or how the body just naturally healed. But if you have a photo of a general, of just like the shape they did, then I don't know, I just feel like that might help you. And also when you have the cast on your face, you have no idea what it's going to look like. You don't know if a complication occurred and they didn't tell you. Like sometimes they don't even tell you, hey, everything went okay, which I cover in this video, but I won't get into that. You can check that out if you want. Yeah, so sometimes, and I believe the quote was more often than not, it can't be discerned whether or not a complication has arisen due to a surgeon mistake or a healing deformity. So yeah, coming out of surgery the way you didn't plan kind of reminds me of the most common deformities. So let's segue into that and talk about what are the most common deformities and just what? The most common rhinoplasty complications are wide nasal tip, retractions of columellar base, irregularities of nasal dorsum, and the most common, the polybeak, which is basically a hump on the bridge and an under rotation of the nasal tip.
You can have a polybeak deformity that happens from swelling, edema, and later on scarring in the nasal tip area where it looks like a beak of a parrot. It doesn't look very pointy, but just swollen and leaning over.
50% of revision cases that have a deformity actually are this specific deformity. This video is not to scare you. This video is not to scare you. I broke down the math, which was extremely simple. If 50%, wait, what is it? If 50% of patients who have a deformity, which is basically like the 10%, 50 of 10% is 5%, and then 5% is 1 in every 20 people. Isn't it? Yeah, it is. So yeah, 5 in every 100 people who get a rhinoplasty end up getting this polybeak deformity, which is 1 in every 20 people. Which if you think about it, it's a 5% chance you're gonna end up getting this deformity, which is like, I feel like that's pretty high. Like, and I didn't really hear any surgeons out of the 4 consultations I had really go into the most common complications and are they easy to fix, are they not? So yeah, and that's a fun fact. Now, if my memory is correct, I didn't write this down. A big reason for a lot of complication was a weak septum. Now, whether or not that be the surgeon's fault or the patient's, but basically having a septum that is sturdy will prevent deformities occurring in terms of projection going weird or bending. But it's important to remember that everyone's genes are different. As a result of a lot of deformities relating to like a weak septum or a septum that just isn't strong enough, I looked into like what makes it less likely to get a deformity, and ENT surgeons, ear, nose and throat surgeons, they know the most about the anatomy of the nose as opposed to plastic surgeons who really work on the aesthetics and then like the kind of function, whereas ENTs are kind of the opposite. At least that's what I found from my research. So if you want to minimize the risk of having a complication, go to an ENT rhinoplasty surgeon. Fun fact, you can get TSS, toxic shock syndrome. You can get that infection after your rhinoplasty and die from it. Who knew? Not me. Just because you're going with an ENT surgeon who kind of has a more medical approach to a rhinoplasty doesn't mean they don't do amazing artistic work. Yeah, I would look into that before plastic surgeons. Just look up in your area, ENT surgeon rhinoplasty, bam, go crazy. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the complications that came with my rhinoplasty surgery. So all I know based off my recent checkup, which I only spoke to my surgeon to speak about my concerns about my nostrils, is that I might have to get a revision. We will decide in about 6 months. So yeah, it looks okay from the front. In some lighting you can see that there is a curve. This side looks pretty good, and then the 45 still pretty good, and then it starts to look pretty strange on the 45 degree here. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that there's like an issue here, but yeah. So yeah, I ended up calling my doctor and saying this nostril is bigger, and he said that it's not bigger, it just appears bigger because the rim up here is higher and the columella actually sits lower on this side. See? So what we would have to do, or what we're talking about at this point, is possibly raising the columella a little bit here so that, you know, it would be like the columella could go in a little bit and look a little bit more normal. And we are discussing ways to lower the nostril curve. Apparently lowering the nostril is one of the hardest things to do in rhinoplasty because the nose just doesn't want to move. So yeah, I already had a graft put in there from the rest of my nose. It doesn't really seem to be working. From some angles it just looks pretty fucking horrific. So yeah, that's what's happening at the moment with my nose. Mostly it's a nostril issue, but I will be talking to my doctor in a few months about the curve in my nose and seeing what he's willing to do. If you're following my journey, I will leave a playlist right here. So yeah, I would say check out going to an ENT surgeon. You have basically 1 in 10 chance of getting a revision, which is crazy risky. I wouldn't get a nose job unless you have serious breathing problems or you fucking hate your nose. If you actually have a nose that, you know, it overtakes your face or it's just generally ugly, then there's nothing wrong with getting a surgery to make yourself feel better about yourself. If you're wondering how I feel, I was just always willing to accept whether or not a complication occurred. I knew my nose was a difficult job, as I've said before in other videos, and if I have to get 2 surgeries to get the nose that I wanted, I'm willing to do that because it's actually something I really wanted to do. The breathing issues and the aesthetics. So yeah, yeah, okay. That's all I have to say. Bye.